He's now going to read our disclaimer, and he's going to read it in Spanish because nobody can understand him anyway.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows.
I've got about 2,700 hours of training that I've taken from like 70 different trainers over the years.
This is the most unprofessional show on the Firearms Radio Network.
And we sold out the entire first print run while I was there.
Usually have one audio hiccup of the night.
This is the After Action Project, and we're bringing you the student's perspective on firearms training. This is the podcast that takes you inside the eyes of the student and the mind of the instructor, from practical to tactical, medical to legal, and everything in between. If there's a course for it, this is your fly-on-the-wall After Action destination. This is the After Action Project.
And you guys be sure to get over there and check out Southwest Gunsmith Technologies out of Edgewood, New Mexico. Rick Kennedy and his guys down there are doing some great things. He's building some competition-ready 1911 for folks, as well as just about anything else that you would like to have done to your firearm. They're doing some laser stippling. I don't know how to pronounce that word still, and I've been saying it for many months now. Tonight we have Karl Rehn of KR Training, and we're going to be talking about his book, Strategies and Standards for Defensive Handgun Training. If you don't have this book already, make sure you pick it up. In the pre-show, I was joking about all the flags that I put throughout the book and how it's just every page has something of value on it. Even going through highlighting and taking notes, I'm like, it's pointless because I just should refer to any page and it will be provide the value that I'm looking for.
So, Jeremy, let me ask you a question about that. Then let's just get right into this. We'll introduce Karl here in a second. But you're a full, basically you teach, almost every other weekend or so, 2 or 3 times a month. As an instructor, because that's what we all are here right now. What was the one thing that you took away from this book that you're like, oh my gosh, I have to apply this to my curriculum?
I honestly don't think I can pull away one thing. I think the way Karl broke down the different skills and the skill sets that the average concealed carrier is most likely going to need is it provides some clarity to what we do on the range, and it was a checkpoint for us to step back and look at, and every round that we have our students fired, what's the value behind it, what's the purpose of it, and can we be doing something to extract more value, or that our students will be able to extract more value in the short time that we're on the range.
I like it a lot. So, Karl, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, why you're here, what you do, all that good stuff. Where we can find you. Just give us your 30-second lowdown of what's going on with Karl.
Okay. My name's Karl Rehn. I am currently these days a full-time firearms trainer, retired from about 30 years working for the state of Texas in a couple of different positions, one doing military research, test and development of military hardware, and then 10 years doing training on a DHS-funded program. So I've had experience on the test and evaluation side. I've experience on the military side. I've had experience doing law enforcement training and competition shooter. And probably the biggest thing is since 1991, I've been teaching classes. And in 2002, we built a permanent facility. And pretty much now I teach about 40 weeks a year. And over the last couple of years, I've been teaching on the road around the country. Got some classes coming up in Georgia and Virginia and Washington State coming up later this year.
Awesome.
So, Karl, talk to us. What was the precursor for this book, and what got you started down this road? And talk to us about that. Why you guys decided to put this out there for people?
Here's all my answers are long, and I apologize for that up front. Everything connected with things I do, everything's a bunch of intertwined little little leaves and circles. Tom Givens has allowed me to come teach at what used to be the Polite Society and now the Rangemaster Tactical Conference. I've been teaching there for about the last 20 years. And every year I try to come up with new material to present at the conference. And so a large chunk of this book is material that I presented over about the last 5 or 6 year period at the conference, things that I was thinking about that I thought people at the conference would find interesting, people that were other trainers, people that were serious students that didn't want to hear another rehash of the same old, basic topics that people present. So a lot of that came from the presentations. The Beyond the 1% was the biggest effort that I put into putting a presentation together during that time. That took a tremendous amount of work, and people liked it so much that I got asked to present it multiple times. Last year, they said, well, can you cram it down into 2 hours instead of 4? And I was like, well, yeah, but there's so much information. Maybe I'll put the whole thing out as an ebook. And so that's kind of where the book started. My collaborator, John Dobb, John's been one of my assistant instructors for about 10 years now. And John had been doing a lot of blogging and writing about minimum standards. And we're like, well, this stuff's really good too. So why don't we put that with my other stuff? And then I had some other presentations that I hadn't finished developing for things I was going to do in the future. It's like, well, the third part of the book, if we just dive in and we finish that, then we can put all of it out kind of as one three-headed beast. And that's pretty much how the book came about. It's to be brutally honest, it was not supposed to be my first book. The last couple of years, I've been working on a book on the history of handgun training, the evolution of handgun training in America. Michael Bain had me on Shooting Gallery. We did a 30-minute episode on that. I've been teaching full-day courses on that around the country. And that book is still in development because this book got in the way. And this book, we kind of knocked it out and got it out the door. And I'm back to work on the historical handgun book and hope to get that out here in the next year. Still doing research. That's the only problem with the historical class is there's so many different things to go dive into. Every time I think I'm done, I find another rabbit hole I got to go dive down to track down a few more things to add one more chapter. So eventually I'm just going to have to stop and put something out.
Yeah. I have a friend of mine that he's actually spending a couple of days with me here at my house, and he's a professional fly fishing guide. And I had to run outside to grab something out of my truck real quick. And as I came back in, I was just thinking about the podcast and, how Jeremy's vision of what we're doing here and whatnot. And I just stopped and paused for a second. I asked Corky, I was like, hey, you ever thought about it? Because he's like the best fly fishing guide out there. I mean, if you ever want to go fly fishing, Corky's the guy you want on your side. And I was like, hey, you ever thought about doing a podcast about fly fishing? And his immediate response was, nope, a book would be better because people can go back and refer to it and talk, and absorb it more. So it's really interesting that you refer back to that book and that being your first, step into, this kind of publishing world. So tell me a little bit about the process about getting to the point of writing the book.
Well, I mean, I had written up some of the stuff that was in the presentations came out as blog material, right? I have a blog, blog.krtraining.com. I put a lot of after action reports from classes. I put some thought pieces up. I don't have ads on it. It's not clickbait. I don't have sponsors. I write what I want to write, when I want to write it, when I have something to say. So it's a little bit different than the modern, we've got to put something out every Tuesday and, we got to fill up this space on the internet. I just put stuff out when I think I have something worthwhile to put out.
I like it.
And so that's, that's my approach there. As I got back from the Rangemaster conference a few years ago, after I gave the Beyond the 1%, I wrote that up and it was like a 10-part blog series. And so a lot of the book content started out, we just lifted the blog material. Same thing with John's middle section. We lifted his series of blog posts that he had done, and then we sort of groomed it together and made it read more like a book and expanded it, added new material and had more discussions and make sure everything kind of fit together.
Okay.
And so he and I both write. We write a lot. We're pretty verbose. We're both fast typers. And so it kind of just came together. It took us about 3 months from the time we said, hey, let's do this, which was right around January of this past year, actually. And we got it ready, and I got the first batch of print copies shipped to my hotel the night before the tactical conference in New Orleans this year. So I sold the first printing of the books out of a cardboard box during my talks, and we sold out the entire first print run while I was there.
Nice.
So every book I brought with me, took home pre-orders, and did a second order of that. Then we did a quick update to deal with some misprints and some making sure we got some credit applied correctly where it was required to acknowledge people's contributions. And that's the book that's in circulation now, is the April edition.
Before we get too far down that, you had mentioned you were writing this other book. You offer a class that I don't think anybody else has offered, and I don't imagine anybody else would offer it in the future, where you take students through the different eras of handgunning or handguns, and the assessments and the skills and the drills that different agencies use. Can you talk about that class a little bit more?
I would love to talk about that class. That is a labor of love. So that class came about because of a trainer named Paul Gomez. Paul was a very close friend of mine. Paul was very influential. He's the guy that really got Craig Douglas motivated to start offering classes like ECQC. Paul worked with Tactical Response. He worked with Andy Stanford. He's worked with Bill Davison at Tac Pro, been a contract instructor for a lot of people. He was a kind of a pollinator of ideas, and one of his passions was the history of handgun training. And he knew more about it than anybody I knew. Well, he and I were talking about doing this project and writing this book, and then he passed away, a very unexpected medical issue, passed away several years ago. And I sort of tried to carry it on in his memory, and it's grown. Basically, what I do in that class is we go through decade by decade, and we talk about the drills, the shooting techniques, who was influential, what books were influential, what gear was influential, and what happened in the world that changed training. So it is literally the history of firearms training starting at about 1900 to the present day. And I go through and I say, these people were important in this era, and here's what they did and why they did it. And part of that, honestly, is because their information was written down in books that magazine articles don't survive. A lot of stuff that's posted to the internet will be difficult to find in the future. Things sort of fade away, and forum posts and things like that. But books and long-form content still survives. I was looking for a book on the history of fast draw. I had to go to the Library of Congress to find it, but they had it.
When you say fast, did you say faster law?
Fast draw.
Oh,
as in cowboy, whip it out.
Cowboy action type stuff.
Because, well, no, not cowboy action. Fast draw, which is shooting from the hip.
Like Bob Munden type stuff.
Like Bob Munden type stuff, because there would be no USPSA, and there would have been no gun sight, and would have been no Weaver had there not been fast draw. If you're not familiar with the history of how we got here, in the late 50s, mid to late 50s, cowboy fast draw with blanks was the shooting sport. And they had a Colt sponsored a shootout in Las Vegas every year that was the biggest money match on the circuit. And it was TV, and Sammy Davis Jr. and all the cowboy Western stars participated in it. It was a big, big thing. Around that time, toward the end of the 50s, Jeff Cooper and Thel Reed and Jack Weaver and Ray Chapman and
all those names,
all the famous guys, and I'm forgetting the fifth guy, and I'm going to remember it later and feel terrible that I forgot it. But they started working with live ammo and more realistic stuff. So instead of cowboy fast draw, they were doing revolver and 1911 fast draw, and their shoot-offs, the Southwest Pistol League, that eventually evolved into the Jack Weaver and the Weaver stance. It evolved into the modern technique of the pistol. That's why we have gun sight. That's why we have USPSA. That's why we have everything we have now. So if you trace back the history of how we got here, cowboy fast draw is the root of the tree, as kind of novelty as it is, or is kind of not relevant today like it was then. But everything ended up going back to that. That was a key piece of the puzzle. Pretty much every instructor that is under 40, probably most under 50, don't know that history. And that's what motivated me to start working on the historical book, quite honestly, was my dismay at the what's going on in the training industry with YouTube celebrities and Instagram heroes and people out there running classes that they literally don't know where the techniques they're teaching came from. They don't know the why. They don't know the lineage of it. And they should, if they're going to teach. So it should be just, I'm teaching you what I learned in a school from a guy who learned it from a guy who learned it from a guy who learned it from a guy. And I'm just going to repeat all the stuff that I've collected up. Having that research background and being married to a woman that's a PhD research scientist, the question why comes up in our house a lot. And we've been trying to chase down who, what, when, where, why. Who did it first, right? Red dots. Oh, wow, it's such a new fad. We're putting red dots on pistols. Bullseye shooters were putting red dots on pistols in the late 1980s, right? IPSC shooters were putting red dots on pistols in the early 90s. And everybody wants to act like that red dots on a pistol are this new revolutionary thing. Well, it's 20, 25, 30 years old. It's not new, but everybody thinks it is. So because they didn't know about it before.
One of the things that I teach, so I'm a training counselor. I train instructors. And one of the things that I always teach my instructor candidates is if you can't explain the why, you should not be teaching it. And a lot of people look at me and are like, oh, now I understand. And yet these people have to understand the background of what they're teaching and why they're teaching it. And if they can't explain the why, they're literally doing what you're talking about right now. They're teaching something that somebody told them to do, something that somebody told them to do.
Right. The only other person that's really pursuing this topic and who's definitely a mentor and an influence and a collaborator of mine is Tom Givens. Mm-hmm. And if you take Tom's higher level instructor classes, he includes lectures on this history stuff as well. He has sat in on all my history stuff. He has some his own material on history, some of which when my book comes out, certainly I'm going to give him credit for unearthing some of those things. And he has encouraged me and pointed me in the direction of, hey, you need to go look at this. And, certainly been supportive of it, as has Masad Ayub, because those guys were part of that history. And, I think that's important. That's the other big thing that matters to me right now is there's a whole generation of trainers that are about to be done in the industry. They're about to be gone.
Yeah.
And not because they want to be gone, but because, they're getting up there. Their ages are, high 60s, early 70s. And, people are starting to say, hey, I'm not going to teach as many. I'm not going to travel as much. I'm cutting back. And there's people like Pat Rogers, Louis Auerbach, Todd Green, Paul Gomez, the people that are gone, that they're just not available to us anymore.
Yeah. You look at somebody like Pat Rogers that was in his, he was like mid to late 60s, it maybe early 70s, and he passed away way too soon, obviously. But, I mean, we lost him like that. Jeremy add in a snap finger there because I have lotion all over my fingers and I can't snap. But, I mean, we lost him like that. It was a, sad and tragic, loss. But you're right. The Clint Smiths, even James Yeager is going to get into his 50s and 60s here pretty soon. So, I mean, there's a lot of young guys out there that we're training that don't understand a lot of this stuff. So tell us how we can get that information out to these younger generation. I mean, there's a lot of millennials that I know that are into guns. They love them. They're awesome. They're great. They're becoming trainers. They're becoming, instructors. So how do we pass this along to them from your point of view?
Well, that's why I'm writing the book. That's why I did there's a shooting gallery episode that's out there that Michael Bain had me on. We did a 30-minute episode on it. And, that's why I started teaching the class. What my plan is down the road, once I get caught up on a few of these projects that are in the pipeline, once I get the historical handgun book out, I do intend to start offering sort of my own instructor improvement course.
I like it.
Which would include some of the historical handgun shooting drills, as well as the historical handgun material, as well as material from the current book, the Strategies and Standards book.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can put stuff together and offer. I've taken so many instructor classes. I'm an NRA training counselor, been through Tom Givens' instructor program and a bunch of other ones. And, I can make a list of the topics that I think should be covered in those that aren't. And, Tom's got his new master instructor program, which is his third level instructor program. He's trying to cover a lot of that material in his program. And, that's great. But again, once he's done, somebody's got to pick that sort of thing up and carry it forward. So hopefully I'll get a little program stood up and can start doing some things, teaching my own, experiences, things like that. It won't be a certification program. It's just going to be for instructors who want to get better.
I love it.
It's going to be instructor improvement, coaching improvement more than a certification.
I love it.
That's awesome. I think that's something we need. I'd imagine the historical book is going to be a little bit thicker than this one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be, well, to give you an idea, that book came out of a 4-hour presentation. The historical handgun, the lecture material by itself can fill 8 hours easily. So yeah, there's going to be no shortage of material. And like I said, I'm still doing interviews with people, and some of the OGs are still around. Karl, that is the other name. I knew I would remember it. Sorry, Karl would be the other of the 5.
So Karl,
Eldon is still around.
It seems like you have a squirrel running around in your head too.
Yes.
That's all it is. Just squirrel back and forth. My buddy Corky yells at me all the time. He's like, "Stop squirreling."
So I want to let's dive into this book, and it is, for me, it kind of takes somebody that's maybe never shot a handgun before, and they're looking at getting a concealed carry license, but more importantly, a handgun for defensive purposes. And it really outlines everything that they need to really know and understand to get them in the mindset that I personally think that somebody that's going to carry a handgun for defense, personal defense, should have. And it also walks them through, I guess, the continuum of training. And I love the way that you have the different drills laid out towards the end of the book. But I want to talk about Chapter 4, risk and training assessment. So for defensive, for the average person that's carrying a handgun for defensive purposes, what are some of the things that you think they absolutely must consider when they're seeking out firearms training and carrying that firearm? If that question makes sense.
Sort of. I mean, the first thing I would tell them is they need to understand that there's a whole lot of problems they're going to encounter in life where pulling a gun is not the solution. And so carrying a gun is good, but it goes back, if you go into the book, I have the chart that we developed I used to teach a DHS threat and risk assessment course. And the chart that's in there is something me and my instructor team developed for that course. And it's probability versus consequences, right? There's lots of high probability, low consequences, things that happen, panhandlers and burglaries and things like that. The gun is for the very low probability, high consequence case, right? And it's good to be prepared for that, but it needs to be part of a full package that, goes back to Claude Werner's analysis. And, Claude is should be more famous than he is, should be more widely read than he is. He's very influential within the group of trainers that I run with. But again, he's not a YouTube celebrity with a flashy, YouTube channel. He's a thinker. He calls himself a tactical professor. And he and I often are the lone voices trying to ask, where's the data for that, right? And Claude looked at data and he's like, well, we need to prevent negative outcomes. And that's what we talk about in the book. We borrow some of his language. So the first thing I would tell the person with the gun is, first thing you need to do is get your training in order to avoid negative outcomes. That means you need to avoid bad gun handling, right? You need to avoid doing things that are going to lead you to make bad decisions with a gun. And then the worst negative outcome, of course, would be needing to use your gun and failing.
Yeah.
And so you need some basic skills. But reality is, if you'll just carry the gun with you, if you have safe gun handling and you carry the gun with you and you understand that the only time you should be pulling that gun out and shoot people with it is when you're about to die, then the rest of it is nice to have, but those are the key pieces, right? That if you understand those basic parameters, most people fail on the step one. They fail on carrying the gun. And often it's not their fault. It's the fact that their job won't let them. It's the fact that they live in a world that's a maze of penalties and challenges that mean you can't have it without risking getting fired. You can't have it without risking going to jail. Even in states like Texas that have fairly permissive carry laws, very few employers allow people to carry at work. And so they end up having to eventually, I have students that have made the decision to carry discreetly in violation of employer policies, and their employers will never know. But it's that doesn't mean you can carry necessarily a Glock 17, the way you would like to. It may end up being a Glock 43 in a pocket somewhere, and it's going to be suboptimal. And but it's better than being unarmed, and that's the challenge is trying to get people to say, I need to carry this gun with me at the risk of diverting down another rabbit hole. There is a sociology professor at the University of Texas named Harel Shapira, and he has been studying gun culture for the last several years, including coming out and taking some classes from us and with other people. And he has a paper that's basically called Learning to Need a Gun. And that's what he describes gun culture 2.0 as, is people like us, we educate people. We basically teach them that they need to carry a gun, that we're training them bringing them around to the mindset that, pants on, gun on. You get up and you put your car keys in your pockets, you have your flashlight, your pepper spray, and your handgun, and you're ready for the day. And that's a foreign concept to those that, don't carry.
So to follow up on that, I have a friend of mine whose name will not be mentioned that worked for a company of a delivery type of thing that won't be mentioned that prohibited him from carrying. And he's one of the best instructors I've ever taught. I mean, he blows me out of the water when it comes to instructing. And what he was doing was he would bring his backpack with his lunch in it, and he would have his firearm in that backpack, and he just, discreetly carried in his truck every single day he went to work.
Yep.
But what would you say to somebody that just doesn't want to risk that doesn't want to risk that misdemeanor or the felony or, bill me later kind of situation? What would you recommend outside of the handgun, even though that's what we're kind of preaching? What would you say?
Then I would say pepper spray. I would say you need some unarmed skills.
Okay.
And you need to think about other things that you can use in your environment, improvised weapons, canes, umbrellas, anything you can throw. Fire extinguisher, spray them with, like Clint Smith used to teach, spray them with the foam and hit them with the can.
Yep.
If they've thought about it, it goes back to some of John Hearn's teachings, that if you've thought about it before and it happens to you, you probably can deal with it because you're not surprised by the fact that it's happening.
Sure.
If you're totally taken off guard by the fact that it's happening and you've never thought about what you're going to do, you've got to stand there and figure it out, and hopefully you survive long enough that then you can take action once you figure it out. But if you preloaded your brain, you say, well, okay, I don't have a gun, but if I get out of my vehicle and somebody pulls a gun, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, then you can take that and take action on it. And so, a gun, it's like the old John Steinbeck quote, the gun's only the tool, right? And they're super handy. But if you absolutely can't have it, you can still do a lot of good stuff, right? You can still do a lot. You can still be very effective. And you just do that with what you have.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. I think that in the pre-show, we were talking a little bit about force on force and sims and airsoft and red guns and blue guns and all that stuff. We, Jeremy and I, and Andy as well, he's our co-host, that's not able to be here tonight, but we teach a lot of that force on force type of stuff. And what we're trying to drill into people over and over again is the mentality of what could happen and what, does happen even. So in your training, in tying it back around to the book, what type of force on force training do you do? What are some of your concepts and thought processes in your scenarios that you build and whatnot?
We start with things that have happened to students, things that have happened to us. We start with things that have happened. I mean, I get the Houston paper every day because there's a murder every day in Houston, and that's a great resource for figuring out where not to be and where not to go. But also it gives you examples of things that have happened to actual people, right? So train for the actual risk, not the imaginary risk. And so a lot of our scenarios, every scenario we run is not a shoot scenario.
Right.
That if we run a block of training, some of them are shoots, some of them are pepper sprays, some of them are runaways, some of them are communicates, some of them are posture. And so each one has a specific preferred desired outcome. Yep. And then they are carefully structured. The magic, I think, where force on force training done well is great, and done poorly turns into a disaster, is the role players have to understand how to feed the cues and give the person the right information to make the decision. And they have to challenge them so that they earn the win.
Agreed.
And they can't cheat them out of the win. And so your role players, they have to be good. They have to understand when to speed up, when to slow down. They have to understand what to do and don't get off script and start winging it. We have another block of training that we do, though, that's very different from what anybody else does. And what I do is we'll set up 7-Eleven scenarios, or we do a bunch of scenarios in a pack and mail where you got people in there moving around. And we will use students as role players, and we'll put 5, 6, 7, 8 people in the scenario, and maybe only 1 or 2 of them have guns. Some of them are employees. Some of them are random people. We give everybody instructions, and it's a little less structured in that we tell them, at least one person gets the instruction, do what you would do. That person may or may not have a gun. We may hand them a pepper spray and say, do what you would do. We may hand someone a gun and say, all those people that post on the public forums that say, such happens, I'm going to pull my gun and jump out in the middle of it. Sometimes we make them do things like that as an illustration, right? So but what we do then is everyone in the scenario reacts to everyone else in the scenario. So it's a true surprise reaction from everyone. No one knows what the plot is. There's no staff role player in it. And so I know where I want the scenario to go, but often, we let people just interact. We give them enough information that they go in and they interact. And it's very much, have you ever heard of the National Tactical Invitational?
No.
Okay, here's more history for you. For 20 years, Skip Gochenauer and Walt Rauch and a number of people up in Pennsylvania ran this thing called the National Tactical Invitational. Again, tremendously influential. It was the precursor to the Rangemaster Tactical Conference. Part of the NTI was you would spend an hour in a force-on-force village. And there were dozens of people in the village moving around doing things like a little city. And there were bad guys in the village, and there was cops in the village. And it was intended to be a full hour immersion experience where you go and live your life, and you go to the laundry and you get your clothes and you go to the bank and you make a deposit and you go pick up your kid from school and all this stuff. And it was extremely elaborate. It took dozens and dozens of staff and months of preparation to set this thing up and run it. And truly, truly amazing piece of history. And again, didn't really get noticed, didn't get written about a lot in the gun magazines. It was strictly open to students of top tier trainers and people in the know. Oh. And so it was not well documented. Skip Gochenauer gave a talk on it at the last Rangemaster Conference, and I was able to capture a lot of the history there, try to get it written up. Well, the people that still did it were around to talk about it. But it's that kind of thing. So you get to live a full spectrum experience with people doing unexpected things, and you have to learn to react to it. Yeah. And so that's a different style of role-playing scenarios. What that does is then at the end of it, I'll grab someone who was a witness in the store and say, okay, you're going to practice giving a statement, right? Tell me what you saw. You're a witness. You didn't pull your gun. You went and hid behind the Cheetos. But, right, the robber runs out the door and runs away. Okay, what was the robber wearing? Right? So we're practicing more skills. It's not just, hey, let's shoot paintballs at each other.
Right.
We're trying to practice all of the skill sets and give them repetitive options. If you're the shooter and the cops show up, how do you act when the cops show up? What do you say to the cops? What do you say to your lawyer? Right? What do you say to the people that you're with before an incident is about to occur? We send you in with your pacifist cousin who's a Greenpeace, whatever stereotype you want to put on it. But you say, look, this person doesn't have a gun. They have no training. And all of a sudden you're in the 7-Eleven and now this person is in the way and is, doing things to cause you problems. They're like, we may have them yell out, do something. You've got a gun. Right. Yeah. and you didn't plan on drawing your gun, but all of a sudden now the bad guys are turning with their guns in their hands. Okay, now what?
Yeah. So one of the things that we do, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy here after I mention this, but one of the things we do in our force on force class is we set up a bank robbery, and the way we set it up is we have two good guys with a gun that don't know who they are. They don't know.
Right.
They don't know each other, and then we have two bad guys with a gun, but they know who their buddies. And we have one guy that's concealed carrying, bad guy. We have two good guys concealed carrying, and then we have another bad guy that comes in guns a-blazing. A robbery, everybody on the ground. And 9 times out of 10, when the good guys with the gun, they want to draw. They want to present the firearm and stop the bad guy, because the bad guy, we instruct him, if they don't do everything you tell them to do, I want you to shoot somebody.
Right.
And 9 times out of 10, we tell the sleeper cell, so to speak, if you see anybody draw a gun that's not your buddy, I want you to pull it out and light them up. And they're usually in the back of the room. We instruct them to kind of, lay low. And 9 times out of 10, the two concealed carry guys or gals draw and try to fire on the good guy, and then they turn their guns to each other.
Right.
And at that point, they usually get lit up by the guy behind them.
Right.
So it's amazing how, the human mind works when we're in that situation. We have to understand that there's an escalation of use of force.
Well, we do that sort of thing, except we'll add like 4 more people in the bank.
Yeah.
And they're, getting in the way, laying on the floor, begging, please don't shoot me.
Yep.
They're the teller that's too slow filling up the cash bag. So we do that. We only do that kind of training a couple times a year because the logistics involved are pretty significant. Yeah. I am taking that class, free plug. I am taking that class on the road. I'm teaching it in Georgia at the last weekend of October.
Awesome.
And I am teaching it in Texas the first weekend of October. We'll be doing that sort of thing.
What part of Texas?
Central Texas, near Giddings, halfway between Austin and Bryan.
Okay, so how far is that from Dallas?
About 3 hours.
Okay, so we have a bunch of friends of ours in Dallas that we'll try to plug that out to.
Great.
So
yeah, it's part of a multi-day. What we do that weekend, I'm teaching force on force instructor on Friday, and then Saturday is 4 hours of live fire, 4 hours force on force, 3 hours low light. Then Sunday morning we sleep in, but we start again at noon on Sunday. Sunday afternoon is force on force integrated with unarmed and firearms, like ECQC type stuff.
Okay.
Then the evening is low light again.
Okay.
So it's a fairly intense weekend.
Yeah,
in the level 1 force on force, it's just pepper spray and red guns and talking. But then the next level up, we put on the fist suit helmets and stuff. And so if you want to tackle people and punch them in the head, you can do that too.
Yep, I have 2 instructors in mind that live in Dallas that I'm gonna talk to about this. So Jeremy, I know you've been chomping at the bit trying to get some of your questions in. I've been kind of dominating the conversation. I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
I warned you, my answers are always long.
No, that's good, and that's part of when we have instructors on here that they have courses and offerings and knowledge that spans the spectrum that our listeners or viewers and that selfishly that I want. It's hard to stay kind of narrow focused. And I'm sitting here. There's a conversation that I want to have about force on force training with you, and I'll hold it to the after show and probably rehash it when we have you back on to do that, to do an after action for that class. If the class you were talking about.
As we're talking about stuff, I realized, the one thing that I usually put in my shameless self-promotion is one of the things that I guess I'm known for at this point is I've got about 2,700 hours of training that I've taken from like 70 different trainers over the years. So you're talking about different instructors, different experience. That's something that I do that a lot of other trainers don't do, that I try to get in at least 200 hours of training every year with other trainers and still, studying to improve myself. And so that's another one of those things that I think is important that not enough trainers do. And I appreciate that y'all are trying to do that because it's hard and it's expensive. the way I learned to do that was I hosted traveling trainers, which means I can get some of that training hours without ever leaving the house.
Yeah, I need to talk to you about how you can fill those classes. We're hosting some folks coming up, and we have we're hosting Tom Gibbons next year. Tim Herron, we're hosting him next month,
Right.
And a couple other guys same reason. I want to get out there and take the class, and these courses are worth traveling to, but you're going to tack on an extra 2 days travel time and lodging expenses.
Here's my approach was offer lots of short courses, cheap local courses to get people into the idea of going to training, right? It's the gateway drug. Oh, I got my carry permit. Good. Now you're ready to start. Now come do level 1, level 2, let's do this stuff, come out and do something else. And then that primes them for bigger classes later. They have to work up to it. Not everybody is ready to go from I got my carry permit to I want a $500 2-day class.
Yeah, exactly.
But after a while, they'll begin to see the value of it, or they'll be interested in it, or they'll just simply enjoy it enough that they want to do more of it.
Kind of in that same vein, when we're talking about the risks and training assessments, on page 25 here in your book, the low risk, the high consequence, so when we're talking about the concealed carrier specifically, there's a very low probability that they're going to be involved in a situation where they have to use their handgun, and an even smaller likelihood that they're going to have to present their handgun and actually shoot somebody with it. What skills should we have then that don't involve the gun necessarily? So if we were to break that up, everything, Tim Larkin, when he talks about left of bang, right? So if we were to bring in that kind of reference, what skills should we have for everything that can happen left of bang?
The thing that I try to emphasize is there's a point in every scenario where something is going the wrong way. Jeff Cooper used to call it condition orange.
Yeah.
Right. And that's your trigger point. And teaching people to recognize that and to take action at that point usually produces a better outcome, or it produces a more controlled outcome. It gives them the advantage that if they wait and they ignore the signals and they blow things off and they forge ahead and I didn't feel right about it, but I went down the alley anyway. Say, no, that's mistake number one. I joke with my students sometimes, everything you need to know about tactics you can learn from the titles of 1970s horror films, right? Don't answer the phone. Don't go in the attic. Don't look in the basement. Don't answer the door, right? There's a whole sequence of those films. Don't this, don't that. But really, that's kind of it. It's you just need to go, hey, this is not a good idea. Okay, well, don't do that. Right? You pull up in the 7-Eleven and things don't look right in the 7-Eleven. It's like, well, there's another 7-Eleven down the block. Let's go to the Citgo or the Texaco or the HEB, or maybe I'll just wait till in the morning to get whatever it is I think I need. Yeah,
that phrase, I never thought it could happen to me. That's a household phrase for a reason. Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them, but their gut probably told them, hey, something's not right.
Well, there's some things that just drop out of nowhere. One of my students had an incident where he was at home at 6:30 on a Monday morning, had come home from the gym and was about to step into the shower, and with no warning and no precursor or anything, his front door is busted open and there's a stranger standing in his living room. And he had time to grab his pistol and try to solve the problem at that point. And at that point, the problem becomes fairly simple. If you point a gun at someone, they usually either run, freeze, or continue to be aggressive. And, two of those three, that's probably a don't shoot. But if they're already in your front door, standing in your living room, and you're pointing a gun at them and they begin moving towards you and your family is behind you, well, at that point, you begin to run out of options. Yeah. But that's one that you think, man, that's so improbable. I wouldn't even run that as a scenario in a class, but it happened.
Yeah.
And several of the scenarios that we run now are based on things that have happened to students. It's like, wow, that's a really unusual thing that happened, but it happened to a real person.
Yeah, I was reading some of the after actions that you had on the archive, on your archive site. And so if you haven't, go to krtraining.com if you haven't been there. And I don't know if it's on the new site or just in the archive, but if in the archive, you have a couple after action reports from courses and, student involved shootings. I think there was one on there from a student of Tom Gibbons.
Oh yeah.
Where the two gentlemen in the house, some great information there.
Tom has there's an excellent DVD out there called Lessons from the Street where Tom goes through 10 of his student involved shootings. And that's really good. I'm a huge fan of John Correa and the Active Self-Protection YouTube channel and his debriefs of actual incidents. I think that's a tremendous resource.
Lessons from the Street, is that part of the AC Armed Citizens Legal?
It's a Personal Defense Network.
It is a Personal Defense Network? Okay.
PDN. There's a bunch of those PDN videos. William April has an excellent one. Craig Douglas has an excellent one. There's a bunch of really good ones in that sequence.
Awesome. Now, if we're talking, we were talking about, the saying in the industry is it's not the odds, it's the stakes, right? It's not the chances, but it's what's at stake. What have you kind of through your experience in years dealing with this and your research, what's the minimum skill set that somebody who's walking around with a handgun on their person, what's the minimum skill set that they should have?
I like the 5x5 drill. We use that in our top 10 drills. That is, draw your pistol and shoot 5 shots in 5 seconds into a 5-inch circle, 5 yards, 5 seconds, 5 steps. Did I get all the 5s in there? There's 4 5s.
5 yards, 5 shots, 5. I have your book.
5 inches, 5 yards, 5 seconds, 5 shots.
Yeah. And again, that drill and other drills are laid out in this book, kind of in a progression for students. And you do something where you break down the different skill sets based on USPSA standards. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem people have is, years ago we had USPSA Master and IDPA Master. Well, it turns out the skill level to get IDPA Master is quite a bit lower than what's required to get USPSA Master. And that started a lot of people that were competition shooters looking at the differences. What I did was take it a little further, and I borrowed liberally from Ben Steger. Ben has a great new book out that has a lot of that breakdown from his perspective in it. But it's basically, there are a lot of drills out there. And what I tried to do was the unified field theory so that you can take any drill that anybody puts out there, and then you can calculate the relative difficulty of it. And what I looked at was standards across a lot of different programs and basically tried to say, look, concealed carry, Texas concealed carry is like 25% of Grandmaster. Your average law enforcement academy, 40 to 60% of Grandmaster. Your average SWAT team, special forces, that IDPA master level shooter, they're about 70% of, USPSA Grandmaster. And then, then 85% of Grandmaster is USPSA Master, and then 95% of what's considered the 100% standard. USPSA recently raised the 100% standard in reflection of the fact that people are shooting better now than they ever have. So it's actually harder to make USPSA Grandmaster than it used to be. So those of us that got it a long time ago probably aren't as good as the people that are getting it. Somebody promotes this year or next year with the new standards. They're probably shooting better than we used to. And, that's awesome. What I did was I tried to give it some perspective and say, look, the average person needs to be in that 40 to 60% range. Most graduates of your typical 2 to 5 day solid handgun program, they're going to get there. And, if you maintain that your whole life and you can do that with your carry gear, you're good. You don't need to be a 70% shooter. You don't need to be a 100% shooter. The amount of effort that it takes, it's like, well, if you have to choose between, okay, I can either go from 50 to 70%, or I can learn some medical skills, or I can take some unarmed classes. Well, if you're in this for self-defense, you should probably go do those other things, right? If you like shooting, I love to shoot. I would shoot guns. If they had no defensive value at all, I would still go out and shoot because I like shooting. So, I'm Grandmaster in 5 USPSA divisions, trying to get the last 3. It's harder than it used to be, and the hill's gotten higher. So we'll see. It's a challenge. I'm getting older, and my eyes are getting worse, and I'm getting slower as I age. So we'll see. But it's a goal for me as a hobby that keeps me interested in just, okay, I need to go to the range and practice. And everybody needs some kind of carrot, some kind of thing to chase to motivate them to pick up the gun and practice with it. So that's kind of mine.
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
And of course they would raise the standards, because I just I'm actually working on getting into USPSA shooting.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out what I can and can't do with the Glock 48 and what division I need to compete in there. I'm one of the guys that likes to, if I'm going to compete, if I'm going to send some rounds.
Shoot limited 10.
What about the Shield Arms, the 15-round mags that are coming out?
Well, you wouldn't use those in limited 10.
So what would be the detriment of shooting limited? I'd imagine if I'm shooting limited, I would be shooting against guys that had 20-round mags.
Yeah, in limited, well, I mean, basically, USPSA is not the game to shoot your carry gear, at least not an expect to win necessarily, right?
Okay, right.
That if you can go and you can get through the goal like that, if you're going to do that, you're going to shoot the Glock 48 USPSA. Your goal should be get all the hits, run everything as quickly as you can, and understand that you're giving up probably 25% on the people that are going to be running it with a gamer holster, with a gun that weighs twice as much as yours, with a 5-inch barrel, and heavy dust cover, and all the stuff you can do to optimize the gear. And so don't get frustrated by that, right? Just shoot the stages as good as you can, as quickly as you can. And if you can execute the stages and get the hits without penalties, then you're doing extremely well.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing wrong with that. The nice thing about shooting limited or limited 10 is you can shoot appendix carry. If you carry appendix carry, you can do that. And if you run 10-round mags, you can shoot limited 10. If you want to run your mags full, you can shoot the high-capacity magazines if you want. And as long as you have the right perspective on it, then you just go and you shoot the stages because they're there and they're fun, and it's better than just shooting one target down at the indoor range. And that's great. That's great. I mean, I'm shooting revolver this summer in USPSA because I'm trying to promote in that division, and that's just something that's exercising futility to a certain amount, because you can't, you're not going to, the guys that are shooting pistol caliber carbines with 40-round magazines, I'm shooting a 6-round revolver. There's just, no matter how good I do, I'm not going to catch those guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
All I can do is shoot a good stage and try to place in revolver, nationally. I can try to shoot classifier and compare that way, but you're not going to catch the PCC guys with the red dots and the comps and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I've been torn because I'm like, well, I want to, practice with the carry gun. But then part of me also acknowledges is that once the gun is out of the holster, fundamentals are fundamentals. And most of the things are going to be the same, all things considered. But we'll see. I'll probably get into it with the Glock 48, and then my competitive nature will take over and want to get one of the fancy open guns that these guys are spending $6,000 on.
Well, what I would tell you to do is if you're gonna move up to a Glock 34. Keep the Glock user interface. If your hand's big enough, you can run a 34. Run a 34. You might need a 17 if you want to shoot IDPA as well. But there's sweet spots in the gear configuration where you can be competitive in a bunch of different shooting sports and divisions. And so if you get like a 34 or certainly a 17, then you can shoot USPSA, you can shoot IDPA, you can shoot Steel Challenge, you can shoot Glock shooting sports. And that training is going to carry backward to the 48 much better than a race gun. Okay,
that makes sense. So back to the book and the average concealed carrier. You mentioned the 5x5 drill as a favorite drill in minimum standards for a defensive handgun user. Talk to us a little bit about. It's one of the later chapters. I have it dog-eared here. I believe it's chapter 15, and you're talking about, chapter 14, defining a path to progress. What, in your opinion, what should that path look like from somebody who's purchasing their concealed carry handgun? They've taken that state-mandated class, and we'll go with the assumption that it was a decent course, covered the law stuff the way that it should have, but there wasn't much shooting involved. What should their path look like after that?
Oh, that's an easy question. What they do is they turn to the chapter that has the top 10 drills in it, and they start with drill number 1, and they practice until they can shoot the goal score on drill number 1, which is 4-inch circles at 5 yards with no time limit. Then they go to drill number 2, and they work on that until they can shoot 100% score on that. 100% not being USPSA 100%, but they can shoot a perfect score on that drill, which I believe is Texas concealed carry test. And then they go to drill number 3, and they work on that. The way that 10 drill series is designed, each drill adds one more thing. It goes from standing still shooting to bringing the gun up from ready with some reasonable time limits to drawing the gun and shooting faster. Then each drill after that adds more stuff, drawing from concealment, adds a reload, adds a malfunction, adds one-handed shooting. So each drill down that sequence of the 10 drills adds one more skill that you need to learn. And so that's why that top 10 drills sequence is what it is. That is its own little self-contained training program that, you work on that till you're good, work on the next one till you've got those skills, go to the next one. Then each time, each one makes it a little bit harder, raises the standards, and then also, gives you more skills to work on. So, that's we actually have a class that is nothing but that. That is the top 10 drills, and we just go through the top 10 drills in the course.
That is not that there's any limited amount of value in this book, but if, looking at that in my own training level, in my progression of skills and capabilities, that chapter 22 is, I think it's a perfectly laid out path and progression, because you're absolutely right. It won't allow, if you follow it in progression, it won't allow you to skip some intermediate skills that I think oftentimes get overlooked. Everybody wants to go from, I can put 5 rounds on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper to now I'm going to put myself on a timer, present the handgun from concealment while I'm moving to cover and fire off 5 or 6 rounds. But they miss really working on and refining some of those intermediate skills that are critical, right? They're missing some building blocks in the puzzle that they're putting together. That was a terrible analogy.
Well, I know what you're saying. What I tell people is this: if you look at the typical USPSA or IDPA target, and actually Ben Steger's new book, the Breakthrough Marksmanship book, has some great graphics on this. Basically, it goes back to what John wrote in our book: is what is an acceptable hit? And people look at that whole, 18 by 24 big brown cardboard target, and they say, well, any hole anywhere on the target is good. No, it's not. If you're shooting down ones or C-zone hits in practice, those are Ds, and down 3s on match day and in real life. Same thing. If you're shooting Ds and down 3s in practice, those are misses on match day or in real life. And so, the people that have performed the best, I go back to Tom Givens and his 63 students that have been in shootings with their 96% hit ratio. Tom trains to shoot 4 to 6 inch size targets. He emphasizes what Lee Weems, the class I hosted the other weekend, he calls it deliberate speed pistol. That, if you're trying to be famous on Instagram, you want, 15 splits and a 0.1 draw or whatever you're trying to get. But it turns out that in the real world, you need time to make decisions. Once the gun comes out, yes, you need a fast draw. But if you can shoot 0.5 splits or 0.3 splits, and you can shoot accurately and retain your mental composure under stress, that's more valuable than, learning how to go ba-bat on every target that you see. Because if you go watch a USPSA or to a certain degree IDPA matches, you'll hear a lot of ba-bat, and then you hear Alpha Mike, Alpha Delta, Alpha Mike, Charlie Mike, right? And so they've rattled off a bunch of shots, but they're not hitting much. And ultimately, if your goal is a defensive shooter, you absolutely need to be able to, it needs to be alpha, 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 down 0. You need to be getting your hits. And the top pro shooters in those sports, they don't drop points. Right? There's a lot of people that go fast that drop points that end up in the middle of the pack or lower. And if you're a defensive shooter, that's not how you want to train. You want to train to get your hits and be deliberate. And then, you can get into the gamer side of it and you start pushing for speed, but draw speed matters a lot. Movement speed matters a lot. Split times don't matter as much as people want them to. Accuracy, consistent accuracy, I think, is worth more than fast splits.
That makes sense. Yeah, a lot of guys are out shooting the pace at which they can think and actually process what's going on.
Well, it's fun. It's great fun to go as fast as you can go and just pull the trigger as fast as you can, and try to hang 2 hits on paper as fast as you can. There's guys that just go to club matches, and that's why they're there. They want to run their gun as fast as they can and have a good time and try to get the fastest time on the stage, and that's their game. And that's fine. It's fun. It's unfortunately what they're programming themselves to do under stress. They may do that, and they may not have the results they want. There's plenty of videos of particularly police officers under stress that Bill Lewinsky from Force Science calls it shooting to save your life, which means they're pulling the trigger as fast as they can and not aiming, versus deliberate precision, shooting with deliberation to get the necessary hits. And so, you get in, you get out what you put in. So if that's what you practice, that's what you're going to do.
I love it. What a lot of oftentimes we talk about what should students look for in an instructor, but what should students look for in a course, right? What should be that next class after their concealed carry permit course? And how would they choose that locally, right? Because there are a lot of great programs out there that would require a day or two of travel. But for somebody that wants to stay local, they need to get it done within 45 minutes or an hour of their house. What should they be looking for in a course?
If they've, I would say they want a course that doesn't put too much information in any single class. One of the things I see is people offer a class and they try to put everything they know in a 4-hour class or an 8-hour class. And you have to have learning objectives, right? Like if somebody asks me, if I say, okay, you're going to come to my Defensive Pistol Skills 1 class. That means you need to be able to shoot 90% on the Texas Carry Permit course. And at the end of it, here's the shooting test. And to pass it, you have to shoot 14 out of 20 on my 3 seconds or less test. And so they're very clear structure. We're going to work on these skills and we're going to get you from point A to point B. Right. And so, I think the things that I tell students to look for is you need to look for somebody that's been teaching for a while. You need to look for somebody that has certification beyond the NRA certification, somebody that has taken other classes and continues to take other classes, and is somebody that is more concerned with teaching you than their social media following. And there's plenty of those good people out there. There's a lot of good instructors out there now. There's a lot of well-meaning, serious people that are trying to do it right that are out there, and I think that's awesome. When I started, there wasn't. In 1991, when I started, I was the only handgun school in my town. We didn't even have carry permits back then. I was just teaching beyond the basics, how to shoot better for competition reasons, primarily. But now there's, I get people that take classes from me, and 6 weeks later they have a website and a YouTube channel, and they're running classes. That's fine. And a lot of them are out of business 6 months later. Because they realize to do it right is hard. You've got to have enough gear and planning and logistics, and you've got to get people to come. And all that takes work.
Yeah, it's not you're not going to get rich. I don't think you'll ever get rich. And few people are able to make a full-time living at it, even if
I didn't. I spent 30 plus years working for the state, putting in my time, retired when I, earliest possible opportunity so I could go full-time at this. But, that's the reality of it. Here's the dirty little secret of the firearms training industry, if nobody's told you this yet, that if you really look under the hood of the majority of the people that are in it, they all have secondary income. They all are retired from military, law enforcement, state service, family money, married into money. I'm not going to name names, but if you do a little bit of research, there's an awful lot of people that, they've got secondary income, and they do it because they love it, and they do it because they want to, and they do it because, they want to make a go of it, and they make money at it. But the number of people that are actually having a true full-time living with no other income from it, particularly at the national level, it's not that big.
Yeah.
It's really not that big.
And
There's a false perception that a lot of people look at the training industry and they think it's a certain way when it's really not.
yeah, it's there's no overhead involved. Well, there's really not a lot of bottom line involved, and I think a lot of
They haven't seen my property tax bill for my facility. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's a nice facility out there.
So,
But
Karl, I like to tell people that I've gone through two of the most difficult career paths that you can possibly take. For about 20 years, I was a professional photographer, and
Oh my gosh,
something that is brutal as it can get.
oh yeah,
And then I suddenly got this hair, and I decided to become an instructor. And that is even more brutal than photography. I mean,
oh yeah.
I never have worked so hard for so little.
Yeah.
And tried to just make it work. I mean, that's our mantra. We just make it work. But yeah, I mean, I totally see where you're going with that.
Yeah, I mean the benefit there is if you have a state that gives you a mandatory course that people have to come to you.
Yeah,
that's the lifesaver for a lot of people that are in this business.
Agreed.
And that's good. Constitutional carry is changing a lot of that. In Texas, I would expect at some point we're going to get constitutional carry. Our state class went from a 15-hour course to a 10-hour course. Now it's down to a 6-hour course or 5-hour course, depending on who you talk to. And now it's 4 hours of that can be taken on the internet. So all I do with it now anymore is I send people to online courses and I do a 2-hour range session. And that's the extent of my state carry permit training work that I do, is strictly running people through the range part, because it's easier for them to go on the internet and do the course, stealing time from their employer, watching videos on the side.
Yeah,
Did I say that? Do people do that? I don't know.
Probably.
They can do it looking at their phone in a restaurant. They can watch the videos, literally anywhere. And it's the classroom part of it. That's the future of that, I think.
Yeah, we have so in New Mexico it's a 15-hour requirement, and that's when we started doing it, I was like, man, that's a long time. But the more that we do it, it's like, man, that's really not enough time with everything that should be covered. And we benefit from it because it has to be a 15-hour class. So we're able to put a lot of the stuff in there. It really isn't a shooting course. We do spend about 3 hours on the range, but it's not a firearms course, really. It's more, knowledge and mindset and that stuff. But I think
that's where we started with the Texas course. What we found is really the stuff people need to know. You could put on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and you start out with, don't shoot anybody that's not trying to kill you. It's sort of a basic. Then the next one, is stop touching it. Right? It's like, don't handle your gun in public unnecessarily. Then identify your target, turn on the lights, and identify before you shoot. And it's just some basic stuff, and then the rest of it is just don't act like a fool in public.
Yeah.
It's so much of that is fundamentals. The rest of it is they need the gun skills. Gun skills give them confidence. Confidence leads to action. Confidence leads to restraint as well. Because if they're confident, if you have a 1.5 second draw from concealment, you sort of know how much time you have to deal with situations. Whereas if you don't know how long it's going to take you to fish your gun that's upside down and sideways in your pocket with no pocket holster, and you've never tried to draw your gun out of your pocket before with any speed ever with ammo in it, and you're trying to do that for the first time when somebody's about to stab you, that's a different problem. Versus if you've drawn your gun a lot from your, you carry and you practice dry draws and you practice your drawing your pistol, that changes your behavior, changes your panic level, right? It makes you calmer because you're like, I know I can do this. I've done this a million times. I can do this literally with my eyes closed in the dark.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So that's the gun skills. The gun skills are important, and the gun skills fade away if you don't practice them. That's why I have so many different classes in my program, because everybody wants something different. People don't. One of the things we do, and here's a bonus tip for instructors. And I learned this from Masad Ayub. Refresher classes are always half price. So any class anybody takes from me, they can always come back and take it again for half price. And that's one thing you can do if you keep track of your students. Once you've offered a class once, you can have refresher training. Right?
I like that a lot. I mean,
for an annual refresher class. That's a 4-hour annual refresher. And, you just go through and we used to do that for the Texas state carry permit. We used to have to go every 4 years and renew. We had to take a refresher class. They got rid of that, but I like the idea. And it should be annual. It should be, hey, once a year, I got to go to the range and shoot my qual course like a police does, requalify every year to verify I can still do it.
Yeah, it's a 2-year refresher here. New Mexico's wacky. We have some wacky stuff going on right now with our concealed carry things. There's a online refresher course that the state offers. The legislation, the law says that it has to be a 2-hour class, but the state approved a course, a 2-year refresher that you can do in 7 minutes you can just take the test, which is fine. I'm not an advocate for the 2-year refresher because it's not our qualification here is 25 rounds on a 12 by 18 inch target. You have to hit the target 18 out of 25 times.
Okay.
You get 15 rounds from 3 yards, and 10 rounds from 7. We've had a student that's legally blind audit the class, so he didn't come through, didn't get a certificate. He took it with his wife. He shot the qualification and he passed it. I think it was
John Johnston and Chris Baker from Lucky Gunner recently shot Texas concealed handgun test blindfolded and passed it.
Yeah. So on one hand, it's
natural point of aim.
Yeah, I believe in constitutional carry, and if it ever is raised here in New Mexico, we'll support it and we'll fight for it. But if you're going to have standards, if you're going to tell somebody they're certified to carry, if you're going to certify them to carry a concealed handgun, and you give them this standard that they have to meet, it shouldn't be an arbitrary standard, right? Because why have any standard at all if it's almost
and we spend a third of the book talking about that.
Yeah,
we started out with a blank sheet of paper essentially, and said, okay, never mind the government. If I care about you and I want to give you a guideline that says I want you to be able to survive because I care about you as a person, I want to train you to a reasonable level. What is that reasonable level? We spend a fairly good chunk of the book talking about that. We even designed our own shooting tests for that, specifically to answer that question. It's what is a practical, correct minimum for armed citizens? What should they train to, right? And John's personal standard is a little bit lower than mine. The test that we came up with maybe is a little bit harder than it should be, but it's a good aspirational test, right? And if you can pass it with 70%, then you're basically in there with John's standard. If you pass it with 18 or 20 out of 20, you're up at where I think you ought to be. But it's that's where we got there. Is my attitude is that I don't think that should be a standard. If you can't pass it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be carrying, but that's the standard you should aspire to, because that's going to give you better odds of actually being successful should you have to use your gun. If you're safe and you're not a danger to others with your gun handling, then I'm okay with people carrying. And, because the vast majority, honestly, you look at Texas, one of my assistant instructors, a guy named Howard Nemiroff, did a wonderful paper. If you look it up, it's called Asset to Texas. And he did an analysis of the crime stats in Texas. And he figured out that if everyone in Texas was as law-abiding as carry permit holders, our violent crime rate would go down 94%.
Okay.
That even the horrible, low level of training that we get, those people are not having gun accidents. Those people are not making bad decisions with guns. They're going about their business and not being any danger to anyone and not causing any problems. And if everyone behaved like they did, we'd have a much safer community. So I think the data is all there to say that we don't need mandatory training and we don't need the standards. But on the private side, I think we need to make the case to say, well, if you actually want to do well, this is what you need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And, we talk about it with using sights. We're shooting at 3 yards and we tell our students, use your sights because you might not need it at that distance. But if it's a smaller target or it's further away, and if you can use your sights and you don't have to, you're fine. But if you need to use your sights and you can't, well, then you're in trouble.
Here's one thing you can do to teach them that intermediate piece of it. You can take either black electrical tape or target tape or whatever, cover up their rear sight. Take away their notch. and that forces them just to use the front sight almost like a red dot, and let them shoot drills at 3 yards using just the front sight. Just put the front sight on the target. It's not the complete point shooting. It's a degraded sight picture.
Yeah.
And it basically will show them how important the front sight is, that if they can get the front sight in the middle of the target, even if it's somewhere near the rear sight, right? What they normally end up doing is they end up shooting with the front sight sort of poking up over the rear sight, and they try to center it up even though they don't have a notch.
Yeah.
So they end up shooting with the front sight a little bit high, but they're also just indexing using the slide of the gun. It gives them degraded visual information, but it proves to them that if you do actually bring the gun up to eye target line and you get the front sight in the middle of the target, even if the rear sight part isn't perfect, and then have them work backwards 3 yards, 7 yards with that degraded sight picture. What can you do? What can you do with the degraded sight picture out to 7 yards? That usually helps them understand what they need to see, not see. Then you give them the rear sight back and say, okay, let's run that drill at 7 yards again. And now you get to use the front and the rear sight. Can you do any better? And that begins to switch on the light bulbs for them. It's like, okay, up close, yeah, I get it. I don't have to, I can shoot with a target focus. I can basically shove the gun and get the outline of the gun between me and in the target, and probably it's okay if I don't yank the trigger too bad. And then as the target gets smaller, as we move back, that whole aiming thing starts to matter a lot more.
I love it. That makes sense. There's one other question that I wanted to ask, but I think we got to it. I feel like we could stay on here for hours and hours. But before we jump off, when you're not shooting guns, where can people find you playing music, making music? And what instrument do you play?
I mostly play keyboards. I started out playing guitar originally. Started making music when I was like 5. And I'm 54 now, so I've been doing it a while. Mostly I just play locally. I'm going to have some YouTube videos out here pretty soon. So Saturday night, one of the bands I'm in, it's a 9-piece band with a horn section, and we added 3 backup singers. So we had a 12-piece band, and we played to about 3,000 people in Brenham, Texas for their weekend of the July 4th, downtown celebration, which was really awesome. Usually what I'm doing is I'm playing piano and singing in some little restaurant somewhere, a couple of different regular weekly gigs I have local to the College Station area. But we get some big gigs with the big band every now and then. I play with a couple of different bands off and on when they need me, and duos, trios, whatever. The phone rings and somebody needs me, I'll go do it. The other cool gig that I have is down south of College Station. There's a place called Santa's Wonderland. It's a Christmas village, like with the Trail of Lights and a bunch of stuff. Yeah. And it's quite an operation. It's like Disneyland for Christmas kind of thing. It's fairly sophisticated, rides and slides and food and all that kind of stuff. And I play in the house band out there, and we play rock and country versions of Christmas songs. So we're doing like Alabama and Leonard Skinner and Bruce Springsteen and Otis Redding versions of Christmas songs. And so I do that during the winter, November, December. Instead of teaching guns, I go play 4 nights a week doing Christmas stuff. And it's good. It keeps me sane, keeps me happy. And I've got, if you look on Amazon, I got albums of original music, Amazon, YouTube, Spotify, eMusic, iTunes, all that stuff. Pandora, it's out there. You can just look me up. I've got all kinds of stuff I've released over the last 25, 30 years. But I played 147 gigs last year as a musician, about 143 days on the range teaching guns.
Holy cow.
So life is good. Life is good.
That's awesome. It sounds like you have some 2 great hobbies that you've managed to turn into businesses.
Ruin and turn into jobs. Yeah. Pretty much. It's ruin and enjoy, because when you get to the level where you can do it professionally, it's fun because you're good enough at it that you can do it at that level. But it also, it becomes also it's a job, and you got to deliver because people are paying and you got to be good. So it's not quite the same as jamming in the garage with your buddies on a Saturday night, but it was great fun to play in front of that huge crowd with that giant band. And I will be on my personal Facebook page. I will be posting some videos. I'm actually when I get done with this, I got to go back to mixing the multi-track recording from that so I can send it to the video guy. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Someday I'll grow up and act respectful.
Well, don't grow up too
Time's
quick.
running out on that. So
Yeah. Well, every it's like 2 days before class, I'm like, man, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And then end of the class, talking to students, I'm like, oh man, we need to do this every day.
there you go. That's me.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm mowing the grass and, cleaning the classroom up and ordering targets and paint steel targets and all this. Like, oh man, this is a ton of work. Why am I doing this? And then class happens like, oh yeah, that's why I do this. Or I get a phone call and it's like, remember all that stuff you taught me? Yeah, I just used some of that and, didn't have to shoot somebody, or in a few cases did have to shoot somebody and I'm alive, and those phone calls will keep you going.
Yeah.
Both kinds.
We haven't had those phone calls, but we've had the, hey, I was afraid to walk my dog, but now I can walk my dog again. That kind of stuff.
That's good too. That's good too, because peace of mind and confidence, that's the thing is people don't understand. They say, well, aren't you, doesn't all this training stuff make you afraid of everything? No, it doesn't. Makes me confident to go places and also smart enough to turn around sometimes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Tom Givens likes to say, what happens to paranoid people?
What's
Nothing. Nothing.
Yeah,
Nothing bad happens to them because they're worried about everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's there's the guy from Intel, Andy Grove, right? Only the paranoid survive.
Yeah.
But I think it just lets you go through life and be comfortable and not be stressed out.
Yeah. Well, and there was a report or an article that I think it was Moms Demand Action or one of those anti-gun leading organizations put out. And then the title of it that got me reading it was like something to the effect that study shows no real benefit for having a gun for victims of violent crime or something to that effect. And I probably butchered the title, but one of the things that they said is that people that carried a gun, they were less likely to use it, and they gave credit to that because of the mindset. And they said, oh, well, people, basically the mindset that gun owners and people and concealed carriers had reduced the likelihood that they were going to be involved in a violent confrontation. And I'm like, yeah, that's the thing that we've always been saying. Like,
well, I think it gives all this stuff just gives you a realistic adult perspective on violence, that it makes you aware that it's out there, that it can happen, that you can deal with it, even if you're not a violent person in your everyday life, that it is a switch that you can turn on when required, and that you can deal with it and you can survive it if you have to. And it also, can teach you all the ways that you can avoid it. So you do everything you can to avoid it. And if you can't avoid it, then if you have to, then you can deal with it later. And that's, the vast majority of people that have gone through it, they come out okay. They really do. Tom Givens, 63 students, not a single one of them suffered a significant serious injury, 96% hit ratio, and no significant criminal charges. That's a tremendous record out of 40,000 plus students that he's trained over the last 40 plus years.
That's awesome. Well, I feel like we could keep going all night, but I'd like to give you and our viewers the rest of their evening back. So do you still have autographed copies of the book at krtraining.com?
We do. We just ordered another 100 actually. So yeah, $20. You go to krtraining.com, you click on the PayPal link, you buy the book, and we ship it to you. Actually, John is in charge of shipping this month. We trade off who has to ship the books every month. We trade that job back and forth. And but yeah, we sign the books, and you get an autographed copy, print copy. The Kindle version, I believe, is $10. And Tom Givens is going to be selling copies in his classes. And the Ben Steger Pro Shop has some autographed copies in stock. You can buy online from them as well.
That's awesome. And we will be coming up with we'll be doing some sort of giveaway where we'll give away a couple copies of the book. So look out on our Facebook page for those details. In the meantime, jump over to krtraining.com to pick up your copy, as well as all the other classes. I was looking at your schedule and your course offerings, and you are a busy bunch of folks down there in Texas. And you can find their schedule, krtraining.com/schedule. If you want to get in a force-on-force course and have the opportunity to, I'd imagine, potentially shoot me with some force-on-force ammunition, whether airsoft or simunitions, I will most likely be at the force-on-force instructor course October 4th that weekend. So hopefully we can get some of you guys down there to train with us.
And the 5th and the 6th is open to everybody. The instructors train with me on the 4th, and then I put them to work on the 5th and the 6th. Okay.
Perfect. So if you don't want to be a force-on-force instructor and you just want to shoot me with some airsoft and simunition, come down on the 5th and 6th. krtraining.com. Anywhere else they can find you? Where can they find you on all your social media stuff?
Facebook is KR Training Texas or KR Training. Instagram is KR Training. Twitter is KR Training. And blog.krtraining.com is where I publish most of my writings. I currently, mostly what I'm writing about these days, I'm reading more books on the history of shooting, and I publish book reviews, a lot of those, and class reviews and various things that I have going on.
Awesome. Well, we definitely appreciate you jumping on and spending a bunch of time with us. Grab the book, guys. It's well worth the $20, and let me know what you think about it. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. We'll see you next week. Man, we really hope you enjoyed listening to that episode as much as we did interviewing and having our guests on. Be sure to share this with your friends and family and head over to patreon.com/afteractionproject. We'd love to have you on as a guest panelist, and be sure to check out those other rewards that we have for our Patreons.
If you're a recent graduate of a firearms-related training course and would like to join us on our show, or if you'd like us to review a specific firearm-related training course or instructor, shoot an email to show@afteractionproject.com. Remember to join a local firearms advocacy organization. As always, stay safe, shoot straight, and remember to secure your firearms so that unauthorized persons cannot gain access to them.